Watching news at Prime. Let's get into this conversation now. A number of advocacy groups are accusing the Finance Minister of using the Social Relief of Distress grant as an excuse to hike VAT. In an interview with Newzroom Afrika last night, the Minister said government needs to find revenue sources for this grant. The Minister is expected to deliver the much-awaited budget speech this week after GNU members opposed an increase in VAT. Let's speak now to Black Sash Executive Director Rachel Rukasa, who joins us from Johannesburg this evening. Rachel, good evening to you and thank you very much for your time. Before I give you exactly what the Minister of Finance had to say, can I kick off the conversation with the SRD grant and what the facts are, and that it was always going to be a temporary measure? This was for COVID relief. Why should it still continue?
So the facts of the SRD grant is that 8 million people are direct recipients of it, and 16 million people in addition to that are dependents on those grants. The facts as well is that whatever you talk about is temporary. It is categorically untrue that the SRD grant is not in this year's budget. So Treasury Director General Duncan Peterson confirmed to the Parliament Finance Committee on the 31st of October 2024 that the SRD grant was included as a provisional allocation in the fiscal framework's baseline for 2025 and 2026. So meaning it was budgeted for, and it has been in the budget for the past 5 years. It is by no means a new or unanticipated expense.
So let's take a listen then to what the Finance Minister had to say on this channel last night when talking about the SRD grant and his struggle to find what he says are revenue sources. Let's take a listen to the Minister.
In an environment where there's no growth, a number of people fall into the unemployment because your employment becomes structural. The key question, how are you going to do to mitigate the impact of that unemployment? So there's an argument for the SRD. But my argument is, if that is the case, which is a noble cause, what we need to do is to find a revenue source for it. And in the absence of finding a revenue source, you're going to have a problem. It's a structural unemployment. You cushion the impact of structural unemployment, but let's find a revenue source to do that.
The words of the Minister, last words. Let's find a revenue source for this grant. Where does he go?
Well, where he should have been going all these years before the grants. I mean, to say that the SRD grant is the reason why he's in trouble now is actually quite shocking. And to be quite honest, we should be wary as a society of the minister's language. I need this. I need this. The minister does not live in a dictatorship. He lives in a democracy. He is a democratically elected official who has to consult not just the ANC leadership, but the broader coalition leadership in terms of how this is done. His personal dislike of the SRD grant should not be the reason why he takes this on. To put poor people against one another, it's either your grant that gives you dignity or it's bread higher prices. It's actually really dangerous, and the minister should be called out for that kind of behavior.
Is it your advice to the minister that perhaps he should look for a wealth tax or look at implementing a wealth tax in order to fund the SRD as opposed to trying to increase VAT?
I will give you 5 examples. That's just not my advice, that economists have been saying around the country, but the minister insists on not listening because he's got a personal vendetta supposedly against this SRD grant. We have recommended a wealth tax or corporate tax adjustments because South Africa, being the highly unjust society that it is, introducing wealth tax will ensure that the people on the higher earning level could ensure fairer redistribution. The second thing is a financial transactions tax. Adding a small levy on high net worth or high value financial transaction could generate significant revenue for him. He needs to be closing tax loops and combating illicit financial flows. He could also be reallocating existing expenditure, like, for example, the government's huge leadership budget line item. So there are all these options that somehow he refuses to look at because for some reason has a problem with the SRD grant. He could generate a lot of revenue from all these other ways, but you would rather not touch the rich, allow them to be fine as long as you can pick on the poor.
Let's talk about the 8 million. I think you said 8 million depend on this grant at the moment. The fear is that that number will likely increase on the back of a recent court ruling that said the manner in which beneficiaries were identified, or at least some of those that have fallen off, this had prejudiced them. And therefore, the expectation is that this pool of 8 million people that depend on it is only going to grow. Again, I go back to the initial question. This was meant to be a temporary measure. If you want it to be a permanent measure, are we going towards the big here, the basic income grant? Is that where this is driving it?
So just before I come to the question of big, I think it's important to note that the reason that people are on this grant is because the government has been unable to create jobs in a sustainable way that is able to absorb young people into this job market. So no person is going to receive 350 instead of a salary. And so what the minister is facing and government generally is facing is the consequence of their inability to ensure sustainable economic growth across board. To now try and scapegoat the SRD grant as the source of his problems is actually shocking. Around the issue of big, it is true because for the longest time, government has been saying that they're unable to have social assistance program at a scalable level in a fast way. But when COVID hit, what we saw was that the SRD grant could be was reached everyone, it was scalable, and it was done fast. So essentially now that is essentially the train tracks towards a basic income support grant. But again, he wouldn't have any of those issues if there was sustainable job creation, because people would always take jobs over grants. So instead of focusing on picking on the poor, I think what the minister should be focusing on is ensuring that job creation happens in a sustainable way. Corruption and illicit flows of money are shut down so that the economy can grow the way it needs to grow and not scapegoat the poor.
Final question. There will be criticism because, as you say, we live in a democracy. People hold different views all the time. There will be criticism that says this is going to be a creation of a welfare state because the people who rely on the SRD grant, these are people who are capable of getting out there and hopefully be able to find a job because they have no inabilities to get a job. The problem is that perhaps it is that structural issue of South Africa that the economy is simply not growing. How do you respond to that criticism that says the fear here is the creation of a welfare state?
I would say that comes from a privileged position that is not even founded in research. Research across the world shows that when the sustainable social protection mechanisms in a society, what you see instead is that people get absorbed into the work world and rely less on those social protection mechanisms. Why we're not seeing it in South Africa is because there isn't a job market to absorb people. So structurally, the argument is not sound. Research does not support that at all. Research supports the opposite. Stronger social protection mechanisms that the government provides means that more people are able to sort of start their own businesses, get into their job economies, and then have less use for the structural support given by government. So anyone reasoning that, I would encourage them to do a little bit of reading.
And so your expectation on Wednesday is that the SRD will be funded, at least that's the announcement that you expect to be made. At the moment, that SRD grant stands at 375 Rand, previously 350. Do you expect it to grow as the years go?
It should grow as the year grows because it's not even in line with inflation. But let me tell you something, Kolani, if he doesn't, so for argument's sake, if the SRD grant does not appear in the budget, we make that fall away. I promise you this time next year, you and I will be having this conversation again, as the minister would have found a new area to scapegoat. And so I think this is a very dangerous road we are going on, and it should be prevented. So in terms of the way forward, particularly with the VAT increase, which we are completely against, if the minister insists on increasing VAT, we'll continue to advocate for strong mitigating measures, such as expanding the zero-rated basket. So essentially goods and hygiene products, foods, and the basics that needs to be zero-rated in order to sort of offset the tax brunt. And then increasing the SRD grant into a place that is inflation-linked and to prevent further hardship on people, as well as ensuring that there's public consultation and accountability, because it's important that government engages with civil society and affected communities, people on the ground, before making decisions that will essentially make poverty and inequality much worse for the country.
Rachel Rukasa, thank you very much for your time. Executive Director at the organization Black Sash. Thank you very much for your time.